He called her just a child with a crush. She fled with a shattered heart. But when the bond awakened, he learned too late. She had always been his. Night settled heavy over the packlands, the air warm with the scent of pine and smoke from the cook fires. In her small room at the back of her family's house, Aven sat with her back pressed against the door, knees drawn up tight. She's just a child with a crush. I'd never see her as my mate. The words looped in her mind, a cruel echo she couldn't shut out. For so long she had believed, no, known, that the bond between them was real. The pull of it thrummed in her bones, whispered in her dreams. Every glance she stole, every step she took in his shadow, she thought it was fate guiding her feet. But fate, it seemed, was crueler than she had imagined. Her eyes blurred as she fumbled for parchment and ink, the tip of the quill blotting dark spots where her hand trembled. She didn't write much. She couldn't. Just a few words that broke her parents' hearts when they found them the next morning. "I'm sorry. I can't stay. Don't come after me." She left the note on her pillow, weighted by the little carved bird her father had once whittled for her. When the house had gone quiet, and her parents' breathing settled into sleep, she slipped through the back door. Her satchel was light, just a spare dress, a ribbon, and nothing else that would tie her here. The moon rode high as she crossed the fields, heart hammering, the patrols distant on the far borders. She didn't falter until she reached the riverbank, the dark water curling like ink around the stones. There, she turned once, just once, to look back at the rooftops silhouetted against the sky. Her chest ached with the words she had wanted more than anything, words she knew she would never hear. "You're my mate, little bird." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed a hand to her lips, swallowed the ache, and whispered instead, "Goodbye, Thorne." And with that, Aven spread her wings the only way she could, by leaving him and the pack behind. The seasons turned. Summer's heat bled into autumn's chill, and still Aven's absence gnawed at the edges of the pack like a wound that would not close. She had been only 16 when she vanished, still 2 years shy of her full maturity. A note had been left behind, shaky words scrawled in ink, a plea not to be followed. The pack had searched anyway, but her trail ended at the river, and beyond that, silence. Word drifted weeks later that she had been taken in by an allied pack across the valley, safe but unwilling to return. Her parents wept with relief at her safety, even as grief hollowed their house without her. At first, Thorne told himself it was for the best. She was young, and in time she'd forget her foolish crush. Perhaps she'd find a mate in that new pack, and the ache of her absence would fade. But as the months stretched on, the emptiness sharpened. He caught himself searching for her without meaning to, scanning the crowd at mealtime, listening for her laugh, glancing toward the tree line at dusk. Every absence reminded him of what he'd driven away. Then came the night of her 18th year. It hit him like a storm, sudden, absolute, a force in his chest that nearly dropped him to his knees. The bond flared to life, unmistakable, searing through marrow and muscle like fire. Aven, his mate. The truth of it crushed every careless word he'd ever spoken. The bond's pull surged outward, searching, but met only emptiness. She was gone, far beyond the borders, and with her absence came an agony that left him staggering. He remembered what he had said, the words spoken too casually, too cruelly. "She's just a child with a crush. I'd never see her as my mate." Guilt carved its mark deep. He hadn't just dismissed her feelings, he had denied his own destiny. From that moment forward, Thorne carried the weight of it. Every hunt, every patrol, every restless night beneath the stars was shadowed by the ache of the bond unanswered. And somewhere beyond his reach, the little bird had taken flight. The valley was different from the lands she had once called home. The air carried the same wild bite of pine and river water, but the cadence of life here was foreign, unfamiliar. The wolves of this pack rose with the dawn, their hunt swift and silent across the ridges, their laughter booming through the halls of the den house long after night had settled. Aven had lived among them for nearly 2 years, and still she felt like a guest walking through borrowed rooms. At 16, she had fled her own people in the dark of night, heart shattered by words she had never meant to hear. She remembered every step of that flight, the way her lungs burned, the taste of salt from tears she hadn't been able to stop. She remembered crossing the river barefoot, stones slicing into her skin, and how she had kept running anyway. By the time she stumbled into the Valley Pack's territory, she had been half frozen, half feral, and wholly determined never to go back. They had taken her in, cautiously at first, but with more kindness than she expected. She had given no reason for her sudden arrival, no explanation for the emptiness in her eyes, but the Alpha of the Valley had looked at her, read the hollow in her soul, and granted her shelter. 2 years later, she had made herself useful. Her hands learned quickly, binding wounds with steady wraps, grinding herbs into pastes, pressing poultices against fevered brows. The healers liked her quiet diligence, the way she absorbed knowledge like parched earth drinking rain. And when she was not in the healer's den, she was in the forest. Her bow grew to feel like an extension of her own body, the taut snap of the string a comfort against the silence that followed her everywhere. To the valley wolves, she became Aven, the quiet huntress, the steady hand, but never whole, for no one here knew the truth. Every night when she lay alone in her borrowed bed, the bond whispered in her veins, a faint, relentless ache that never eased. The mate bond was not something she could forget or deny. It had bloomed too early, awakening in her heart before she was even of age. She had felt it, certain and unshakable, in the way her soul tilted toward one man's presence. Thorne. Even here, miles away, his name was a wound she could not close. She hated him for it sometimes, for the careless words that had shattered her. She's just a child with a crush. I'd never see her as my mate. Those words had chased her from her family, her home, her pack. And still, the bond tethered her heart to his. It was cruel, this half-existence. She could laugh with the valley wolves, smile at their jests, steady her aim on a buck in the underbrush, but beneath it all, a hollow yawned inside her chest. Survival was not healing. Independence was not freedom. Aven endured, but she was never free. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months. By the time her 18th year came, she had built a life that looked whole from the outside. The young wolves teased her gently when she returned from a hunt with game slung across her shoulder. The healers praised her sharp eye and nimble fingers. The Alpha himself nodded when she bowed her head in greeting, a silent acknowledgement that she had carved a place among them. But the nights undid her. When the moon climbed high, the bond stirred inside her, fierce and aching. Sometimes it was a whisper, sometimes a roar. Sometimes she woke, gasping, clutching her chest as though she could hold her breaking heart together with her hands. She never spoke of it, not once. And in that silence, she learned to carry her hollow like a second shadow. It was a morning like any other when her world shifted. The air was sweet with thawing snowmelt and new growth, the forest alive with the rustle of spring. Aven knelt in the healer's den, grinding comfrey root into paste, her hands moving with practiced precision. The rhythmic scrape of pestle against mortar soothed her, kept her mind quiet. The door creaked open. When she glanced up, her breath caught. The messenger stood framed in the threshold, travel-stained and solemn. His cloak bore a crest she had not seen in years, the sigil of her birth pack. "Aven," he said, inclining his head, "your parents request your return. The Alpha commands it." The pestle slipped from her fingers, clattering against the stone mortar. Her throat tightened. For 2 years, no word, no summons. Now this? Her voice cracked when she managed, "Why? What's happened?" The messenger's gaze softened, though his tone remained careful. There are talks of unrest between the packs. Your alpha calls all bloodlines home. Your family has asked for you by name. The words twisted like a knot inside her chest. Unrest. Bloodlines. She wasn't just being summoned as a daughter. She was being recalled as a piece of the pack, a thread that belonged woven back into their strength. Her parents, her siblings, Thorne. The bond flared at the thought of him, sharp and unrelenting. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And if I refuse? The messenger hesitated. I was told to tell you that the alpha does not ask. He commands. Aven swallowed hard, her heart pounding. The valley had become her refuge, her escape, but it had never been her home. The hollow inside her throbbed with every beat, pulling her back toward the place she had tried so hard to leave behind. She bowed her head, steadying her voice. When? By the next moon. She sat in silence long after the messenger left, her hands still stained green with comfrey. Around her, the healer's den hummed with life, the rustle of drying herbs, the drip of water in clay jars. But inside her chest, the hollow roared. She had survived here. She had grown. But now fate was calling her back. Back to her family, back to the alpha, back to the bond she had never escaped. Back to Thorne. The valley pack saw her off at dawn. Mist lay in the hollows of the hills, pale as breath, and dew jeweled the grass beneath her boots. Aven stood with her satchel slung across one shoulder and her bow case across the other, the familiar weight both comfort and anchor. Around her, the little circle of faces she had come to trust gathered in quiet farewell. The healers with their ink-stained fingers, the scouts with wind-tangled hair, the alpha who had offered her shelter without questions she couldn't answer. You owe us no debt, the Valley Alpha said, his voice low, but you owe yourself an answer. Go find it. Aven's throat tightened. She bowed to him, then hugged the healer who had taught her which leaves soothed fever and which drew the poison from a wound. She promised the scouts she'd keep to the ridge path and stay out of the ravines where the spring floods cut sudden channels. She did not promise she would come back. When she turned toward the eastern road, the sun broke the ridgeline and set the mist aflame. She walked, the road unspooled beneath her feet, rutted in places where wagon wheels had chewed the thawing earth, smooth where bedrock surfaced like the spine of something ancient. The forest changed as she traveled, spruce to pine to birch, the pale trunks banded with ink-black scars where storm and season had bitten deep. Birds called in the canopy. A red fox watched her pass from a fallen log, its tail flicking once like a question. Her breath found an easy rhythm, but nothing in her chest felt easy. The bond lay quiet as a coiled wire, dormant only in the way a storm is quiet beyond the horizon. Every step east tugged at it. Every mile pulled it tighter. At midday, she stopped to drink from a spring that broke from the hillside in a clear ribbon. Cold bit her tongue and woke her senses. She ate bread she had baked the night before, a heel left over because she'd been too anxious to swallow more. She stared at the crumbs in her palm, then brushed them away and kept moving. By late afternoon, the land shouldered up into the first foothills of her birth territory. The trees thickened. The undergrowth wore the old scent of her pack like an invisible veil, ash from familiar cook fires, resin from the pines that lined the main path, the faint iron of the river stones polished by 1,000 bare feet crossing the shallows. Memory hit her so hard she had to stop and set a hand against a tree to steady herself. She breathed through it. In, out. The bark was rough beneath her palm, sap tacky against her skin. Home, she whispered, surprised at how the word hoarsened in her throat. When she crested the last rise before the outer border, she saw them. 2 sentries on the ridge, shadows cut out of shadow. They went still at her approach, then moved in a practiced arc to bracket the path. She recognized neither. Boys had become men in the years she'd been gone, and men had been sent to other posts or other lives. "Halt!" one called. He stepped into the light. His eyes flicked over her bow, her satchel, the crestless cloak that marked her as no one's sworn wolf. He didn't recognize her. Relief slid through her like cool water. "Aven," she said, raising her hands, fingers spread to show no threat. "I was summoned." "You were—" His gaze sharpened, then widened. "Aven?" Something like shame and pride collided in her chest at his surprise. She nodded. "I have a message with the Alpha's seal, if it's changed hands since you last looked." She drew the folded summons from her satchel and held it out. The red wax caught the last of the afternoon light, the rune pressed deep. He took it, scanned, passed it to the second sentry. They exchanged a look. The first returned the paper and cleared his throat. "Welcome home," he said, the words slow, as if unsure of their shape. "Escorts waiting half a mile down. Orders, with unrest and all." Unrest. Even the border carried the word like a burr. They fell into formation without fuss, one ahead, one behind, both watchful. It should have comforted her. Instead, it felt like walking into a river whose current spoke a language she'd once known and now feared to remember. As the path curved and dropped, the main grounds came into view. Great hall rising from hewn logs, darkened by weather and smoke, training field trampled to earth, cook fires sending up thin blue threads that stitched the camp to the pale sky. Different and the same. New watchtowers, short, functional, set at angles that widened the sightlines, fresh stakes reinforcing the east palisade, a stack of spears newly shafted. The place wore change like armor. "Hold." The voice cut clear across the yard. It landed in Aven's bones the way thunder does, as sound and pressure and a memory you haven't earned yet. She knew the shape of it before she found him. Thorne stood near the training field with a knotted map spread across a table. A cluster of wolves ringed him, all lean focus and taut attention. He pointed once, twice, his finger tapping positions on the parchment. When he looked up, his eyes swept the yard with the instinct of a man who has guessed a danger before it shows its teeth. Storm gray. She had remembered correctly. She had remembered everything. Heat shocked her skin, then cold, then heat again, an alternation so rapid it left her unsteady. He saw her. It was not the casual recognition of a packmate returned. It was not even the wary cataloging of a potential threat. It was the look of a man who had spent 2 years learning the shape of an absence and suddenly found it standing in front of him. The wolves around the table followed his gaze, heads turning as if on a single wire. Her name moved through them. A whisper slivered into the air. Aven. Her escorts peeled back to either side, uncertain whether to announce her further or fade. No one stepped forward. No one needed to. The space between her and Thorne emptied of other people the way a forest goes quiet when a storm front slides into the canopy. Not by choice, by pressure. She did not move. The bond rose like a tide, cool then warm, lapping and receding, then rushing in so fast she almost staggered. She took one breath, two, anchored herself in the feel of leather against her palm and the bite of bowstring against callus. Thorne came toward her. He looked older. Not in years, they had stretched him but not broken him, but in the way responsibility carves a man to the bone. Lines at the corners of his eyes that weren't there before. A scar at his temple she didn't recognize. The kind of stillness that lives in men who have stood between their people and the night and kept the night out. "Beta," someone called from behind him, urgency threaded through the title. He lifted a hand, a signal to hold. The word hung in the air and fastened itself to him like a seal. Beta. So there it was. Not a rumor or a guess, but a rank spoken into the open. Second in command, the man the Alpha trusted when trust cost. He stopped a breath out of reach. Aven. Her name was gravel in his mouth, roughened by too many nights spent turning it over like a stone. His gaze flicked to her mouth, to her hands, to the bow she wore like a second spine, then back to her eyes. He did not look at her like a child. He did not look at her like a mistake. He looked at her like a man drowning looks at the surface. "Beta Thorne," she said evenly, and the use of his rank steadied her. The band inside her chest that had gone wild at his approach found a rhythm she could survive. I was summoned. His jaw tightened, the smallest flinch at the distance of the title. He deserved it. He took it like a penance and did not look away. "You were," he said. "The Alpha wants you in the hall when the evening horn sounds. Your parents—" He paused, and something like relief and sorrow braided through the line of his mouth. "Your parents will want you sooner." "My parents first," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She counted that as a victory and didn't turn it into more than it was. He nodded once. "I'll take you." It would have been simple to refuse. There were a dozen wolves within a shout who could lead her the length of the yard to the house she'd grown up in. But refusal would have been a message, and she had promised herself she would not be petty, would not be cruel, would not try to draw blood from a man who had already cut her once, without meaning to, and bled for it ever since. "Thank you," she said. They crossed the yard side by side with an arm's length between them, and the space felt crowded with 1,000 things unsaid. Every step pressed the bond in her like a thumb bruise, tender and insistent. The din of the grounds rose around them, sparring staffs clacking, a pup barking at a chicken twice its size, the cook's voice sharp at a boy who tried to filch an apple. Ordinary sound, the kind that hides a cliff edge until your toes hang over it. A woman broke from the doorway of a low house and ran, skirts fisted in both hands, hair flying, her mother. Aven barely had time to brace before she was caught in her arms and held so tightly her ribs protested. The smell of flower and rosemary and wood smoke enveloped her. She didn't know she was crying until her mother's shoulder was wet. "Aven, Aven," her mother's voice fractured on her name. "You stubborn, brave girl, don't you ever—" She stopped, pressed a kiss to Aven's hair, and didn't finish the sentence. Some words tear more when you try to tie them into knots. Her father came slower because men who have had to stand when their hearts would rather run often do. He put his hands on her shoulders and looked at her as if he could inventory the missing years by sight alone. The lines around his eyes deepened. He nodded once, swallowed twice, and pulled her into his chest without speech. A sister barreled into her next, then a brother, then another cousin who had shot up a handspan and developed elbows like weapons. Aven laughed, really laughed, and felt the laugh unspool something knotted in her throat. When she lifted her head, Thorne was exactly where she had left him, 2 paces back, as if by old instinct he would not breach the circle of another's family. His gaze was steady, and even from here she could read the relief in it, the unclenching of some hard-set muscle in his chest as he watched the way she fit where she had been cut out. "Come," her mother said, catching Aven's hand. "You're skin and bones. There's stew and bread and every sweet thing I can lay hands on. You can tell us nothing or everything and we will sit and listen like fools." "I have to report to the Alpha at the evening horn," Aven said, "because obligations were how you kept other, wilder truths from pulling you apart. But I'll come now." Her mother's gaze flicked to Thorne, read rank and distance in a single glance, and inclined her head. "Beta." "Myera," he returned, his voice gentled the way men do for women who could still lift them by the scruff if they tried. Respect sat naturally on him. It always had. That had been part of the trouble. He stepped back another half-pace. "I'll meet you at the hall," he said to Aven, his tone professional, the words shaped to carry only as far as they needed. "There's news you should hear with the others." "Unrest," she said. "So I was told." His mouth thinned. "Border skirmishes on the north line, traps set and sprung in our hunting grounds. 2 supply runs harried hard enough to lose the wagons, no deaths. A beat. Yet." His gaze flicked to her bow, as if reassuring himself she still knew how to use it. "We're steady for now." She nodded. Information did what it always did for her, turned fear into edges she could hold. "I'll be there." He inclined his head and left with economy, cutting back across the yard to the table and map and wolves who pivoted to him with the relief of men who want orders more than reassurances. He gave them. His hands were sure. His voice carved paths through the noise. Beta fit him like a healed scar, tender in weather, but part of him now. Her mother tugged, and Aven let herself be led inside. The house smelled like her childhood. Not exactly. The bread was different, the soap the same but thinner, the wood floor a shade lighter where sunlight had pried into it day after day, but close enough that her heart and mind staggered, trying to reconcile the then and the now. She touched the back of a chair and felt the notch in the wood her brother had chewed when he'd been teething. She set her satchel down beside the hearth and watched as a cat she did not remember took it for an insult and sat on it in protest. They ate, or rather the others ate and pressed food on her until she managed a few bites of everything to prove she would not slip through their fingers like smoke. Her mother watched her hands more than her face. Her father asked questions like a man mapping a landscape he'd only seen in dream. The younger ones told stories so fast they tripped over each other's words until laughter smoothed the heap into a story with edges and a middle. In the lull that followed the second bowl of stew and a piece of honey cake she could not taste for the tightness in her chest, her father's gaze found hers. He did not glance toward the door as he asked the question she had tied to a stone and dropped into the deepest part of herself. "Will you stay?" Aven folded her hands in her lap so they would not show her parents how they trembled. "I don't know," she said. Honesty did not cost less for being small. "The Alpha summoned me. There's work to be done." She kept her voice even as she added, "I can do work." Her mother's mouth softened. Pride and something like apology moved through it. "You always could." The horn sounded then, low and sure, the note that wound through the camp twice each evening to call the pack to its center for council. Aven rose. Her mother caught her wrist gently. "You don't have to do this tonight. You've been on the road. Let them wait 1 hour for what they made you wait 2 years. Aven kissed her mother's forehead. "If I wait, it will still be waiting when I get there." Outside, the light had gone slant, the shadows long and blue, the sky the color of watered ink. Wolves moved toward the hall in 2s and 3s, conversation trimmed to essentials. Aven walked among them and felt their glances slide over her like light over water. Some recognized her, some didn't. Curiosity ran ahead of judgment, which was mercy. At the hall doors, 2 guards crossed their staffs and then, seeing her, stepped back in the same motion. The Alpha's second, Thorne now, Beta by title and truth, stood inside with a roll of parchment under one arm and the set of a man who had been bracing all day. His gaze found her and softened, not visible to anyone who did not know him, perhaps, but undeniable to her. The bond tugged, and she let it move through her without moving to meet it. This, too, was a skill. Within, the Alpha's table held a map weighted by stones and knives. The Alpha himself stood behind it, gray threading his hair at the temples Aven didn't remember from before. He lifted his arms, and the murmur in the hall fell away like a tide. "We have trouble," he said without preface, "because men who have kept a pack alive through hard winters have no use for ornaments on bad news. The Northlands test our borders. We have met them in kind and will continue to do so. Supply lines are tightened. Patrols doubled. We have asked our allies to stand near enough to hear our call." He didn't look at Aven when he said allies. He didn't need to. "And we have our bloodlines called home." His gaze found her then, not unkind, not easy. "Aven." She stepped forward to the edge of the long table. "Alpha. You were a girl when you left us," he said. "You return a woman. Will you stand?" It was ritual and question both. The easy answer was yes. The honest answer was yes, and something else besides. "I will stand," Aven said, "where I am placed, where I'm needed." "Good." He gestured once, and Thorne moved to unroll the parchment, positions marked, routes traced, choke points circled in a precise hand. Then listen. They did. Aven listened with her whole body, the way she had learned to listen to the forest when it spoke in the grammar of wind and wing. She asked questions when questions sharpened action. She did not show how her palms heated whenever Thorne's hand brushed the map close to hers, how the bond surged at proximity like a tide pulled by a nearer moon. When council broke, the hall did not empty so much as loosen. Wolves clustered in knots, assignments, provisions, watch pairs set. Aven turned to step back into the flow, but Thorne's shadow fell across her, and she knew before he spoke that he had not let himself ask for what he needed while others watched. "Walk with me," he said quietly. She could have said no. She had decided an hour ago she would not take pleasure in refusing him simply because she could. "Only to the door," she said. They moved through the slow current. Night had settled outside, and with it the particular quiet that comes when a pack turns its attentions inward and the borders hold. The air was cool enough to raise small bumps along her forearms. She folded her hands to hide them and met his gaze. He didn't waste the first breath on anything like small talk. "I owe you an apology so large I can barely carry it," he said. No flourish, no theater. He stood with his back to the hall and his face to her, as if he had decided to stop choosing the easy angle. "I didn't ask for one," Aven said. "I know," he swallowed. "I heard you anyway. Every night." Silence moved between them, not comfortable, not cruel. It felt like standing on the narrow spine of a roof in wind, the ground far on both sides. "We are not who we were," she said finally, because it was true, and saying it did not obligate her to say anything else. "I'm here to stand with the pack, that's all." His mouth tightened at that. Not at the boundary, that, she suspected, he had prayed to be given the chance to accept, but at the shape of a life in which she stood beside him for duty and nothing else. He inclined his head. "Then that is where we will begin," he said, and the relief in his voice was quiet and devastating. "I'll earn whatever comes after." Something in her chest shifted, not forgiveness, not yet, but the recognition of a man who had set a weight on his shoulders and meant to carry it to the end of the road. He turned his head, listening, wolf-keen. "You should sleep," he said. "You'll be on the southern watch at dawn. With me." His mouth quirked, not a smile exactly, but the memory of one that had lived in a different life. "Unless you'd prefer Sel Grent. He snores, loud." "I prefer men who do their job quietly," she said, and realized too late that she had given him a rope to hold. "Then I'll try to live up to your standards," he said. No tease in it, just intention. He stepped back. "Good night, Aven." "Good night, Beta," she said, and watched the title land and wait his posture and still settle on him like something he'd choose again. When he was gone, she let out the breath she had been holding since the border. The bond hummed in her, not sated, not soothed, but contained. She put a palm to the hall door, felt the grain of the wood and the thrum of voices through it. She thought of the girl she had been and the woman she had made herself into and the space between them that might yet be bridged. She went home to her mother's house under a sky pricked with cold stars and lay awake listening to the night breathe until the night breathed her back. Dawn would come, work would come, and with them the long, unglamorous path of proof a man had promised to walk, and a woman had promised not to make easier than it needed to be. Outside, somewhere on the south line, an owl called in the dark, the soft sound of a hunter who has learned patience, of a little bird grown, listening. This is only the beginning. In part 2, Aven must face her homecoming and the mate who once rejected her. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll know the moment part 2 is released.